Hello and welcome to On Point. This episode features a conversation between Lisa Benitez, the Chief Diversity Officer at the United States Military Academy West Point, and Herman Bowles, International Director and the founder of JLL's Public Institutions Business Unit. Herman also serves on several high-impact public, private, and not-for-profit boards, including USAA, the American Red Cross, the Military Bowl, Comfort Systems USA, American Campus Communities, and the West Point Association of Graduates. He is founder, president, and CEO of Bowles Advisory Group, a real estate and management advisory firm. Herman completed 12 years of active duty service with the United States Army and retired as a colonel in the U.S. Army Reserves in 2008. He is part of the West Point graduating class of 1978 and received an MBA from Harvard Business School. In this episode, Herman talks about leading the initial charge for diversity, equity, and inclusion at West Point, as well gives insight into how the school has continued to expand those efforts across the organization from the board, staff, and faculty to athletics, admissions, and alumni. He helped establish and was the first chair of the AOG Board's diversity community and continues to support West Point AOG to be the most connected and inclusive alumni group in the world. Now, please enjoy this interview between Lisa Benitez and Herman Bowles.
Hi, my name's Lisa Benitez, and I'm here with Herman Bowles, class of 78. And Herman, I don't know if you remember when we first, well, not when we first met, but when we reunited. It was almost 25 years ago in May of 1997. It was my first day coming back to West Point, being hired at the West Point Association of Graduates. And it was actually a board meeting. And it really, looking back, that really was what started me on the path that I'm in now, and now in this capacity as a Chief Diversity Officer here at West Point. And just thinking about that, when did you know in your life that you were going to lead the diversity and inclusion efforts at West Point?
Oh, wow. First of all, Lisa, great to be here and great to see you. And of course, your class, 1988, is a class that I taught at West Point as I was on the faculty from 85 to 88. And of course, one of your best friends, Andrea, was one of my students. And I think it's been a pleasure to be associated with your class. And as we think about West Point, you know, every superintendent says we actually graduate 2 classes every year. So it's a class of cadets. And of course, it's that class of faculty and staff that we put back into the Army as well. So it's all good. Well, you know, Lisa, I don't ever think I had an aspiration or a thought that I would lead diversity at West Point. However, I have been, since I was a little kid, somewhat of a leader. You know, I was president of my high school student council. I was a quarterback in football and all of those things. And not that I tried to do anything, but I just did the things that were, you know, I felt appropriate for the time. And certainly the things at West Point that really started me thinking about diversity, believe it or not, was an experience I had in my graduate program at Harvard Business School. And if you think about West Point, and one of the things that you always knew, we had really small classes of minority students or cadets or graduates every year, and you have these reunions. And by the way, I've gone to every one of my reunions. However, some people that don't have a very good experience, they choose not to participate. And we had something at Harvard Business School where, as opposed to just participating in your reunion class, we started an organization called African American Student Union of just the African American students. And what that did, it gave you a economy, so to speak, of scale that you could look at issues that were in the best interest of the students at the time and also in the best interest of the graduates. So that organization, student-led, student-run, they would put on a conference every year, and they would make the invitation out to all of the African-American graduates. And that would bring back a really nice group of people. And after I graduated and I got involved in the Association of Graduates just in terms of being a volunteer, I said, if that model worked there, would it work at West Point? And what I did from there, again, I was not a member of the board. However, I wrote a memo basically outlining what I just told you and suggested to the AOG that this is something that we could do And of course, being a Harvard Business School grad, what I knew is that resources were important. And part of my rationale was that not only will we get more engagement, this could also be an opportunity to get, more fundraising and get people involved. And obviously we didn't have all the social issues we have now. And I got to tell you, Lisa, initially it was probably received not with resistance, but I'll say suspicion. Because some people were like, I was actually at the time a reserve officer teaching in the Department of Social Sciences. And the word on the street was, hey, there's some reserve officer up here who's trying to start a black AOG. And it was so funny. I remember my response was, oh, no. I would never do that. I want to use your infrastructure to do what needs to be done because we don't have the capital or the money to try to have a separate organization. So it never was an intent of having a separate organization. And from there, I just always been a person to try to not see things as they are, but think about what they should be. And that's a little idealistic, I know. But in the process, I had no problem. Shai Meyer was the chairman of the AOG. Minton Francis, and Minton is from the class of 44, the first African-American to be on the AOG board. I got introduced to him. And between talking to the two of them, basically came up and said, hey, I got this idea how we can invigorate our African-American graduate body, and let's try to get them together. And from that, Lisa, working with my classmate, Curtis Harris, who happens to be on the board now, it took us a year and a half to do this. So I'm basically making it go short. I wrote, Vince Brooks, for example. He was a major, I think, at the time. And he mentioned this when he spoke at West Point a few years ago. And I just wanted to make sure there was some groundswell support for this idea and for this effort. And we put together the first diversity conference. It's what it came from. And as you're aware, Lisa, that conference used to be sponsored, and the initial ones for, probably the first 8 to 10 years were sponsored by AOG. And it was so great. We went out. One of my classmates worked at Coke. They gave us $10,000. My firm, JLL, gave money. And we not only were self-sufficient in pulling this conference together, it also made money. And the graduates had such a great time. So it was a combination of just getting together for fellowship, good music. We still had Academy officials speak, to give an update. And that was the start of that, which resulted in a few years later, us actually having a diversity committee on the AOG board.
I remember that first. I think it was called Minority Outreach Conference. It was like in 1996, the fall of 1996. And it was, as you indicated, an AOG conference, getting the alumni together. And then some years later, it did shift to the academy. How do you feel about that switch? Do you think it's still accomplishing the intentions from the original conference?
Well, let me start by saying, first of all, Lisa, we have to understand at the AOG that our goal and our role is to support the superintendent and the academy. So how I may feel about it in terms of personally, you have to come back and say, what is our role? And, I got to tell you, to be totally transparent, when the academy first took it over, it really lost a lot of focus, okay? Because what it is, when I say it lost focus, because it was trying to be everything to everybody. And the African-American cadets who had become accustomed to this event, they came up and, West Point's not easy to get to. It's expensive. It's hard. We generally had it in the cold weather months anyway. And people came and all of a sudden it wasn't the fellowship of what they had experienced in the previous 5 or 6 years. But at the same time, the academy, from their perspective, from Department of Army, had basically said everybody needs to do something about diversity. So I think the superintendent at that time said, we got this thing, which is, the academy was certainly supporting it, but the content was done by AOG, and then the content got switched from the AOG to the academy. Now, I think we did a better job in not talking about somebody's better or whatever when we were focusing it on, my intent. I certainly want to be totally inclusive, and we need to make sure we include all of our graduates for all minorities. So from the Hispanics, Asian, Latin, whatever, we need to include everybody. However, my objective when I set this up was to say, we're going to focus on the African-American graduate body, and we're going to get them engaged, and we're going to make this academy better for everybody. That was the intent of it. So sometimes when you try to be everything to everybody, you lose a little focus. And as a result of that, the participation from the African-American graduates reduced significantly over the next few years.
Yeah. And I always recall when you would bring up the topics of diversity at West Point, you would often say this: what gets measured gets done. And I think you would agree that with our DEI efforts here at West Point, especially in admissions, we always make the point to say we have goals, not quotas. So are you optimistic where we are now in 2022 as far as the academy?
I am optimistic. There's no doubt. I mean, you look at the leadership at the academy now, you've got an African-American superintendent, you've got an African-American commandant of cadets. That's not going to last forever. And I think previous superintendents, I've worked with, every one of them for the last 20 years, had a personal relationship and been somewhat of a kitchen cabinet advisor to them. And I'm moved particularly by the results that we've had in the admissions office. However, an area where I've spoken to, General Williams about, I've spoken to the dean about, that I'm, very concerned about the faculty and staff. Okay, we are not representative there. I understand all of the challenges, from the talent getting out earlier to people thinking that this is not good for their career. And I tell them, whether you're going to stay in the Army, look at this guy named General Austin. He came back to West Point for an assignment. Or look at Leo Brooks. Or if you're going to get out of the Army, look at Herman Bulls. I mean, things can work out okay coming back to the academy. So I think that can be overcome somewhat. However, that is an area that, like everything else, if it doesn't get measured, people do not understand the progress, and you may or may not get it done. So the staff and faculty representation for women as well as minorities, I think that's definitely an area that deserves attention. And Lisa, that brings up, I had the privilege, I've been on the board a long time, and no one will probably ever be on the board as long as me again, because we had several changes during the process, which every time they changed the structure, kind of the limit of the number of years changed. So I've been on the board for a matter of fact, I'm probably on the board more than anybody in the history of the AOG. And part of that continuation is sort of good. And from the aspect as we look to kind of what do we do? So the AOG finally about 8 or 9 years ago, we established a diversity committee, a formal committee, which is a committee of the board. Before, everything was just done ad hoc. And with that, my good friend Archie Elam led that for one of the initial leaders of that. And at the time, the only thing that committee did was work on the conference. That was it. And General DeFrancisco, I think I've been chair of the audit committee. I've been, chair of the compensation committee. And he asked me, he said, Herman, will you take on the diversity committee? I'd like for you to do whatever. Archie left the board, and then I took over as chair of that committee. Well, as you know, Lisa, you're on the committee. We got about 20 people. And the only thing we're talking about is this conference that happens once a year, where in reality, we did not have the influence over it that we had before. So it was a supporting role, and there's nothing wrong with that, as long as we're helping the academy. And as I thought about it, when Joe asked me about it, I said, well, I think we've got to do more with this committee. So as I thought about my experience in corporate America, I serve on several Fortune 500 boards, and I really see governance at its best. I said, 2 things I want to do. Let's look at this to see how can we truly make a difference for the academy, because that's why we're here. And number 2, how can you get more people involved? Because everybody that goes to West Point is a leader, and they want to be involved. Some of them are waiting to be tapped on the shoulder, but given the opportunity, West Point graduates come in and they produce. So I said, okay, let's do this. Let's try to think from my corporate structure, what are all the things that need to be looked at that you have as committees on a board? So I thought about it. I said, okay, what are the areas that West Point perhaps needs help in? Let's start with admissions. So we had an admissions subcommittee that we worked with the admissions office, again, not making policy, helping them implement, whether it be from the cadet CPRC, public relations program, to helping with recruiting, et cetera. Then the next thing you do is you say, okay, we've got this thing called staff and faculty, which I spoke of as an area that I think needs some more work. And as you know, Lisa, you've been working with me for the time that I was chair on that. And by the way, we now have a new chair of that committee, and we know that Sally is going to lead that going forward, Sally Lewis. But that committee, we're looked at, okay, we will work with the dean, we will work with the commandant, we will work with the director of athletics to help them in any way related to diversity. And speaking of the Department of Athletics, I remember going to an Army-Navy game. It's probably been about 10 years ago. And I'm sitting there and I open up the book, and it has staff and administration for the academy. There was not one black face on that. And you look down at the field, and 75% of the kids were black. And that just, I am not the only person that was sitting at that game that noticed that. And I noticed it, and I said, well, we've got to, this is a discontinuation here, and we've got to think about that. Mike Buddy, as you know, I introduced you to him, and he's been phenomenal to work with. He understands the issue. He wants to work with us and you and the committee to say, what is it that we can do to make sure that the athletic administration is also representative of not only our nation, but the kids that we have out in the field. And then the next thing is thinking about special interest groups. But the idea is that we have West Point women, we have the swim team, we have the choir, all of those areas to say, let's look at that to see how we can get more graduates involved, and let's make it easier for these organizations to do things. We have a group of African-American graduates to do more together. Those kids have taken what Curtis and I started, and they've taken it to a new level. For example, African-American females come into the academy. Most people don't think about it. They got to get their hair done. Their hair's a little different. And these guys not only come up and recognize that, but they come up with kits that they give them to make sure that after sweating in the field and everything, you have some idea of what it's like being a black woman in the academy in that type of environment. They're working with admissions. They're working with all of them. So that's great with all of those interest groups we have. Another one we have is corporate governance. Okay, this one people got a little nervous about, but I was okay with it. And corporate governance is basically saying, let's look at the AOG itself and let's see how we're doing as far as diversity is concerned. And man, I'm telling you, under General DeFrancisco's efforts, and of course, before him, the other chairmen have done a fantastic job. And as we look at the board right now, we have 4 African Americans on the board of trustees right now. Okay, and that would be Ron Johnson, 76, Curtis Harris, 78, Dana Petard, 81, and Erica Jeffries had just started. They're 98. And then I can't get in all the names, but if you look at the advisory committee, which for all of our listeners that don't know, we have the board of directors, and we have also a list of advisors who, I would say younger graduates, but people that want to get involved in West Point. You can go by your class, you can go by your region, you can go at large. And in that group, out of 52 advisors, 10 of them are women. Okay, that's 19%, almost mirrors what we have at the academy. 6 of them are African American, almost 12%, and 1 Asian. And now I'm going to tell you, listeners, this did not happen by accident. This happened as a result of leadership, and I'll give Joe DeFrancisco, our former chair, all the credit in the world, because as you know, and everybody should know, the board does not pick board members. The board is picked by graduates who are selected to be on a selection committee. So there is no institutional inbreeding. And all we did and what we have done, because I can't guarantee anybody that's going to be on the board, but I can say that we went out, tapped people on the shoulder and said, have you ever thought about doing this? And most of them had not thought about it. And then they said, oh, yeah. And these individuals are being selected because of their merit and because of the support that they have demonstrated for the academy.
Thank you for bringing that, reminding about the shared interest groups, and especially in this Do More Together. I was in a meeting with them, with General Caslin, and it was kind of like one of those kitchen cabinet talks that you had mentioned. And that's when they explained about the situation with women of color, African-American women with their hair. And literally this was 35 years after we've had women at West Point. Women entered West Point in 1976. And this was in the early 2000s. And they were like, the amount of time you give cadets to go to the barber shop or to the beauty salon for women is not enough for women of color. Our hair takes longer. And this was 35 years after women were there. And it was like a light bulb went out and in his head, General Caslin, and he's like, oh, we'll fix it. And as a result, we've worked with the barbershop and beauty salon to expand hours and have sometimes, and then several times a month, have the workers come in on the weekend to accommodate. Because also, as you indicated, West Point is a challenge to get to for conferences or reunions. There are not a lot of beauty shops in this area that support the women of color. So just jaw-dropping that we've had women for like 35 years here, and that did not come up even from on the tactical officer side or other people here. And that is the importance of having the ability to have candid conversations with one another. And you've always been candid and transparent, especially on the board side. And as you just indicated as well, we have seen our board, the diversity of it increase. Are there any gaps that you're seeing now within like the board or the committee?
Specifically for the board, I got to tell you, our current chairman, Bob McDonnell. Bob, obviously, our listeners should know that he's the former CEO of Procter & Gamble. Bob's also the Veterans Affairs Secretary. As a matter of fact, when Bob was the VA Secretary, I actually served on the VA board. He put together a board of civilians, business people to help advise him on running the department. And Bob, let me tell you, I think all of our chairmen get it. Bob gets it. I mean, he understands marketing, all those Procter & Gamble products that you've purchased over the years. However, it's just not marketing with Bob. It's his true who he is down to the bone of his heart. And he understands what it takes. And I think with Bob's continued leadership following General DeFrancisco, we'll go in a systematic manner looking at what are the skills. And this is the way I just left the board meeting this morning for one of my boards, Host Hotel, Fortune 500 company. And we talked about succession planning and board gaps. And there's something called a board matrix that you do. And you basically take the people that you have and then you look at what are the functional skills that are necessary from being everything from marketing, technology, legal, personnel, human resources, et cetera, et cetera. And the idea of the board is we're not there to manage the AOG. We are there to provide governance and oversight. There's an old saying in corporate governance is nose in, hands off. So Todd Brown and his team are responsible for the day-to-day management of the organization. And our role at the board is basically two major roles we have. Number one, select the CEO and mentor him or her over the years and give them feedback. And then the second thing is really resource allocation. And that determines the priorities of an organization. And we do that by approving the budget. So, and then from there, the framework has been set, and then it's our job to make sure that the person that we selected is making sure those strategic priorities we have agreed on are being achieved in an appropriate manner. So we're very, very happy with the skills that we have on the board. We've got a great group. The new group that just came in is just off the chart. And I often say, just like it is, Lisa, getting reviewed to go into the academy, I wouldn't want to compete with these kids that are going to be on the academy now. And I'm going to tell you, our board is really the same way. It's just people, we tapped a few people on the shoulder and said, why don't you consider? And the majority of the people are just people that care about West Point. Because again, you pay your own way, you do all this good stuff, but the feeling you get from having contributed to the well-being of the institution that is so precious to our nation, West Point, is uncomparable.
Herman, earlier you indicated how you essentially recruited people to apply and be active on our board and committees. Here at the Academy, we have a program called the Minority Visitation Program, which has really made an impact on our African American diversity numbers. Actually, you and your family have generously contributed to that program. Are there any other programs that West Point or AOG should consider to encourage diversity and inclusion?
Indirectly, we are, as I told you, in terms of the staff and faculty. But again, we walk a very tight line, okay? On the one hand, in terms of being advocacy, being advocates, we have to be very, very careful, okay? And some of your listeners, I hope, can and appreciate this. Because, again, the superintendent, none of us know, unless we've been superintendent, and I've been close to a lot of them, the number of stakeholders that they have to deal with is, every old grad has an opinion, and most superintendents hear from a large percentage of them. So they have to do things in a measured way. And of course, any leader, you've got a vision, you've got your standards, and you've got your ethics, and you're going to go forward. However, in this meantime, it's also important that you understand all of the stakeholders out there and that you're appropriately communicating with them the best you can. So in terms of saying, things that should continue to do, I think, those shared interest groups that we talked about, I think those are very, very important. And when Todd Brown got the job as CEO, one interesting idea he brought to the table said that he wanted West Point to be the most connected alumni group in the world. And Todd has done an excellent job of thinking about. So if your listeners are not familiar with Sallyport, okay, something they can download on your iPhone or your Android device, and you can find any grad, and most grads have opted to be in it. You can find any grad that's ever gone to West Point and send them an email. And if they turn on their location, a little creepy, you can actually tell where they are at the moment. So if you're in San Francisco and you just want to see, who's around, if they've got their phone on, you can see every West Pointer in the area that is there. So programs such as that, I think, are certainly outside of the box and very important. So I think if we do what we've done, Lisa, and that is we have a representative board, okay, and we do now with women and minorities, an area that we can improve upon is Hispanics and Asian. Sally certainly helps us there as well. However, the point is we have a very diverse board. Then what Bob and the chairman do is create an environment. And you can imagine coming into that room the first time, people are probably a little, reluctant to speak. And that's what the chair and the vice chair, it's our role to make sure that everybody brings their full self to the board and that they have the ability to contribute because you're there for a purpose at least. And that is to provide a perspective. And I think as long as we continue to have the ability to identify those issues, some of them require resources. And for example, the Visitation program required resources. And Lisa, I want to thank you publicly now for all of you did for pulling that program together. Not only that, and one of the things that we looked at is saying, and I always tell people, I say this behind the doors, I said, hey guys, we can come up and talk about all the things we want to happen for minorities and African Americans, okay? But if you don't show that you can put some resources behind it and raise some money to make it happen, you're going to get the sympathy look. I don't want a sympathy look. I want to look because I belong at the table. And when you show that ability to bring resources, that enhances your ability to have a say in what goes on.
Absolutely. Money makes the world go around. You had mentioned one of the AOG goals of being the most connected graduate body in the world. I personally can give many examples as to why we are the most connected graduate body in the world, even before it was AOG initiative. Why is this important in the DEI world?
It's very important. If you get back to it, and let's talk about an experience that I just had in the last 6 months. So I was on the plane. I went out to the Army Wisconsin game. And this young, you can always tell you get on the plane, tell a little secret here, you can always tell the law enforcement people because they get to get on first and they get on and they talk to the pilot, right? So you're like, okay, he's an air marshal or whatever. So this African-American lad was in front of me. I, got on, get in my little seat early. And the gentleman said, hey, you're Herman Bulls. And I, having taught there for, in essence, over 20 years, that happens a lot. And I'm like, well, and then I'm in a lot of other situations. And I'm like, I didn't recognize him per se. And I said, yes, I am. He said, hey, my name is Brian. And I got to tell you, I just love to talk to you sometime, whatever. And I went to my seat. He got in his seat and we got off the plane. He said, hey, look, I work over at the FBI. And if you'd like, I'd love to have you come over and visit. And I got to tell you, Lisa, I've already today gotten 10 or 15 emails, people that would I just want 15 minutes with you. And it's just impossible to do them all. But I must admit, I do respond to them, and I'm transparent in terms of the fact that if I gave everybody 15 minutes, I wouldn't have time to sleep. But in this instance, it was just something about Brian that was intriguing, and I gave him a card, and he gave me his card, and then, the next day I got an email from him, and he was actually going to the game as well. We were flying into Chicago, and he said, "Hey, look, I really want to get you over to the FBI." And it took us about 2 months to do it, but about 3 weeks ago, I went over to the FBI, and I go in, and Kit meets me to escort me up, and he says, "Oh yeah, I happen to be a West Point grad as well," and it was Brian's chief of staff. And we go up, and I knew Brian was kind of high. I'd done some research on him. And then I go up and I get in his office, and then I learn that Brian Turner is the number 4 person in the FBI. Okay. And I'm sitting there, and we're talking, and he says, "Herman, let me show you this." And he showed me a article in a magazine from CW Post where he had gone for his graduate degree to come back to be a TAC at West Point. And they had an entire whole page spread on Brian and what he was doing for our country, et cetera, et cetera. And Brian didn't say it in a sense of anger, but he said, it appears that CW Post cares more about what I've done than my own undergrad alma mater. And I said, okay. I said, "Don't worry, Brian, we're going to fix this." So long story short, and Brian, you're listening to this one day. I hate putting our personal conversations out for the public, but this is for the good of the order that we're talking here. And long story short, got Brian introduced to Jay. Okay. And if those of you who don't know, and by the way, I want to tell you another thing we've done at AOG, our senior leadership. Okay. I want to talk about Terrence Sankville, who's African-American. He heads Alumni Affairs. You got Christine Richardson, female, who is the chief of staff, in essence, to Todd. We've got Kristen Sorensen, who has done a fantastic job. Lisa used to be your boss, raising money. We got Cheryl Brooks, who looks over HR. So we are living it. We're living that diversity and and Lisa, we were sorry to lose you, but we're happy where you are. But in any event, got him introduced to Jay. Todd wrote him a note. Guy's number 4 in the FBI, and we've got this thing called Combating Terrorism Center. And guess what he oversees for the FBI? Cybersecurity and terrorism. So with Suzanne Nielsen, got him connected to them. So that's the connected alumni work. We've got an individual here that not only for what he has done should be recognized, and he's not looking for that now, okay? But we should do that, okay? We should celebrate that. The other issue is what he will be able to bring back to the academy in terms of the connections that he has in Washington, D.C. to support our academic programs will be phenomenal. So that's that connected. That's that connectedness. And, and I told Brian, I said, this goes both ways. Yes. And we found out, to tell the truth, and I believe in transparency, we found out that we had a little glitch in our internal system at AOG. One part of AOG had heard about it, but it didn't get over to the part of AOG that would have done something about it. And I'm happy to say that Jay is going to fix that. And that's for all graduates, not only African-American graduates. We should be doing this and celebrating all graduates' success. But in this instance, where we're particularly trying to connect and make sure in this environment, I'm going to call it the Rodney era, we've got to make sure that we take advantage of every opportunity to celebrate that we get.
Absolutely. And like you said, things are for the good of the order. And thank you for always bringing best practices, not only to the AOG, but to West Point, because they do make a difference. And that's the importance of being inclusive and, listening to others and taking that advice and putting it to action. And regarding connectedness, just the other night, you connected me with someone who is on the Sec Army's team, and she was actually here today, and her father is from class of 78. So we are really, really a connected group. And I know we haven't mentioned your sons, who I know you're proud of, 2 of which are also West Point grads and who have been back here at the academy and are doing great things. I don't know if you want to share any differences between their experiences and your experiences, or any opportunities that they've had in their careers.
Yeah, well, they'll get mad at me for even talking about them, but probably the person that had the most impact on them, and me for that matter, is my late wife, Iris, who unfortunately passed away last year. Get a little emotional here, but she was so proud of those kids. And Herman Jr. graduated in 2005 and has done just a fantastic job. Infantry guy, 3 tours in the war, and he's now working out in the Army marketing office. And he was selected, as you said. He worked in the admissions office, and before going there, went to Duke for his MBA. Then Nathaniel did not go to West Point, but he's just been such a fan of Army sports and Army football, and supported Jonathan when he was playing, and he always keeps up with everything West Point. And Nathaniel went to Earlham College, and he's now working for Sodexo in the healthcare area, so he's been busy the last couple of years. And then Jonathan, you mentioned, he graduated in 2011, and some of your listeners may remember he was the Army punter on the team that broke the drought and not only went to a bowl game in 2010, but beat SMU for Army's first victory in a bowl in over 20 years. So Jonathan medically retired from the military after 6 years, and he also went to Duke for his MBA. And he's, as we speak, we're recording this today. It's just before the Super Bowl, and Jonathan works for Microsoft in sales, and he was one of 5 people out of the nation selected on a sales competition to get to go to the Super Bowl. So he'll be leaving for the Super Bowl tomorrow as a result of his hard work. So he's doing a great job. So as far as their perspective, I mean, first of all, I don't even think they didn't grow up saying, I want to go to West Point. It kind of just occurred. Jonathan didn't even start the process until the second semester of his senior year. Matter of fact, the admissions I heard later, they said, this kid doesn't really want to be here. I think he's getting parental influence because his brother went here, his mom worked here at admissions, and his dad, taught here and went here. So he actually went to a civilian prep school for a year and then went to West Point, just did a fantastic job, both as a cadet and the contributions he made to the Army football program. So like anything, Lisa, and I know, speaking of kids, you got some great kids, even though you had one of them go to the Naval Academy, who's my adopted daughter. And you know as well as I do, your kids mature over time, and things that they would have done 20 years ago are things that they do different now. However, as we both pushed our kids to do things, I know they have an appreciation for it now. And those kids just love West Point, and they know that, not only what we have given today, but what we will continue to give the West Point, basically what theoretically would be their inheritance. But we feel so strongly as a family about West Point that we are very, very big supporters, not only with our time and talent, but we tithe there as well. So, and they're okay with it.
And I definitely would be remiss, and Iris was taken from us way too soon, the matriarch of your family, and just a distinguished career. And so many things I found out after she left us too soon. It was she was just so humble, an extraordinary individual, and your life partner, and the two of you, the family and the sons that you've nurtured and encouraged them and set them on the right path in life. I share this with you in your home with your guests, just how much she meant to me and my family, and just such an inspiration. I do remember because it was a celebration of life, and we talked, reminding us to eat our vegetables, to eat your broccoli, your greens each day, and to read every day, and encouraging the grandkids to eat. So we definitely want to include her in that. And I know she was also part of your philanthropy. I mentioned it earlier about Minority Visitation program, but I know you support other Margin of Excellence programs at West Point pretty much across the board.
Yeah, there's one that we're working on now. We're making a significant contribution because Iris, in addition to being an Army officer, we met at Fort Dix, New Jersey. She moved in across the hall from me, and as they say, the rest is history. She when I was at Harvard, she was at Tufts. She was an admissions officer at West Point. She worked on the Bush-Quell inaugural committee. She was a presidential appointee in the Clinton administration, number 2 person for personnel in the Army. So she had a huge job. And then after that, she went and worked in the defense language area. So she put together all the, matter of fact, she worked with all the academies. The academies didn't want to have another language course. She was arguing they needed it because she worked on language and culture issues. And one of the things that she and I had discussed prior to her passing, and we're going to certainly take it, is that she wanted to do something at West Point. You know, I'm kind of supporting the athletics and all that good stuff. She says, I want to do something around language and culture. So we have an outline now that we need to finalize where we're going to do something in the Department of Foreign Language where we want to encourage Black cadets to get involved in foreign language and culture and foreign affairs and those types of things, because it was very, very important to her. And we're going to honor her with something that will get a few cadets off overseas doing whatever they need to do, because she just understood the importance of that in her day job. And we will be very, very happy to have her remembered in that way. And we've done some fantastic things also at her alma mater. We can't forget our HBCUs. She went to undergrad at Virginia State University, and we've made a sizable donation there as well. She started working on both of these before she passed, and we're still finalizing. Actually, we've finalized the language for the one at Virginia State, and it is again for students even from this HBCU to be exposed to language and culture and international affairs. And I can't think of a more lasting thing for her to do, because this lady, I'm going to tell you, you're right, she was so humble. Lisa, I had so many people come up and tell me the same thing that you did after Iris passed. It's like, Iris is not Herman's husband. Herman is Iris's. You understand what I'm saying? It's like, yes. she was just the probably the more humble of the two of us. But let me tell you, I'll tell you who wore the pants in the family. I'll tell you that. You've been to our house before, so you know that.
Yes, and beautiful home, and just you and your family just pay it forward. Having been in fundraising at AOG for 23 years, I understand the importance of margin of excellence, and that's the X factor here at the Academy. Obviously, the Academy is federally funded, but Kristen and her team just continuously raising over $50 million each year for the last 5 or more years now. That really allows the Academy to do special programs to enhance the 47-month experience.
You brought up such a great point there. And what a lot of our graduates don't understand, particularly the older back they go, it's like the government should be doing this, the government should be doing that. And I agree to some extent. However, if you look at any high quality higher education institution out there, they help themselves in terms of the graduates helping to give back. So if one of the things that the AOG really is there for, and I think General Chrisman, we need to give his superintendent, give him the credit for coming up with this idea of the margin of excellence. And I can remember on the board, and when we were thinking about getting Kimsey Center done the first time, he came to the board and he showed a picture of the Naval Academy's weight room. He showed one of the Air Force Academy's weight room. And I tell you, he didn't have to doctor it up. And he showed Army's. I mean, you just went, you got to be kidding me. And he kind of came up with the margin of excellence, because the government will pay for those basic things that we'll get after 47 months, a cadet commissioned with a degree. But for example, I'll never forget my classmate, Louis Caldera, was Secretary of the Army. As a matter of fact, Iris was working for him at the time, and we were building Arbin Gym at the time. And, we had to, let's just say I did a little, behind the scenes. I'm here in Washington. I know a few people and making some introductions. And one of the congressmen, he's like, you guys got to do what other people do as well. And what that is, the core or the infrastructure, the envelope of the gym, Arbin Gym, was built with government money. However, the climbing wall, all the equipment and all of those other things, that was done with private money, coordinated by the AOG. And that's what we say the margin of excellence. So, for example, all the cadets that go on the AIADs the summer that, in addition to CTLT, cadet troop leader training, the government pays for that, right? Because that's helping you become a leader. But when we send them to France, I don't know how, we're sending them to 50 different countries over the summer, all of those things. The government does not pay for that. In order to enrich that cadet experience, that comes from donated funds. And that's that margin of excellence. And look at what that margin of excellence did. 4 Rhodes Scholars this year, to include 1 African-American. And talk about diversity, all 4 of them females. Okay, it gives me goosebumps every time I see that picture. And, that's what we represent, is opportunity. It takes money to make things great. Just look at the Alabama football team.
Roll Tide. Yeah, and actually 5 of our last 9 Rhodes Scholars are African American, and they all started in another Margin of Excellence program called the Excel program, which was actually started by a professor, Dr. Erica Rovira in BSNL, and a tactical officer, Lieutenant Colonel Gatling. And actually, he was probably like a major back then, captain promotable major. And they were just talking about why is it that all the scholarship winners at West Point are majority cadets or white cadets. And there is a scholarship program run. We had 4 women, as you said, earn the Rhodes Scholarship this year. But they created this program to help cadets of color. And this program was started in 2012. And since its inception, we've had over 50 primarily African-American cadets earn postgraduate scholarships, mostly in the STEM field, actually. And that program never would have existed if it wasn't for the creativity and the thinking, the forward thinking, just like you indicated earlier that you have, Herman. And them, as you know, AOG raises money for what the Academy programs, what they want. Once we got the green light from the Academy, we've raised funding for this excellent program, the Excel program. And that's just one that we've talked about Excel. Our DCA clubs are also funded primarily through donations.
Make sure your listeners know what DCA, Director of Cadet Activities, yeah.
Yes. So that is the directorate. They have over 130 clubs for our cadets, very robust. And they also manage some restaurants and our Eisenhower Hall Theater. So they do have some revenue generation sources. They also need the funding for those 130 clubs because, as you indicated earlier, having the clubs here at West Point, this is not needed to produce a second lieutenant. So that is margin of excellence to have these clubs for these activities for our cadets to do. I mean, there's a whole development team that manages all the needs of the academies. But if it's going on here, gospel choir, National Society of Black Engineers, Big Brothers, Big Sisters, the Jewish Chapel Choir.
Yeah, well, Lisa, I even what the Academy does, I can remember back to my cadet days, and even when I was on staff there teaching, if you looked at kind of who the outside speakers that were brought in, there wasn't a lens of, are we bringing people that will inspire and promote the well-being of all of our cadets? It was like, okay, can we get whatever? And if the people who are making those decisions are not diverse, they're going to reach to their connections, and you end up with this funnel of non-diversity. And I think what the Academy does now in terms of, look at who are even the Thayer Award winner last year, African American, win that award. And I think, look this year, distinguished graduate. We had African American female. We had 2 females to start with, and we also had African American. So the constitution and fabric of our Academy is just so important that we make sure that we're representative of everybody. I mean, everybody. And, white males should not feel like they are excluded. You're part of this fabric, and you are represented. You will continue to be represented. However, we are the United States Military Academy, and we exist to help defend the Constitution of the United States, ultimately.
Well, Herman, thank you for your time today. Really appreciate spending time with you, even though it's virtually. And I know I expect to see you this spring when we thaw out up here in New York.
Yeah, well, looking forward to it. And Lisa, again, I want to thank you, and definitely want to give a shout out to Todd Brown, our CEO, because again, we get excited about this as board members. We're involved more than once a quarter. However, Todd is living it every day. And I tell you, in terms of what he has done to diversify the staff at the most senior levels, to be available to talk to people, how he responded to this Brian issue. He just got it right away. And he knows, because if we're successful there, we're going to get more people, and we're just going to be much better off. So I really commend you, and we're so happy to have you back at the Academy in another capacity. We certainly miss you at the Association of Graduates, but the good news is we get to continue to work with you, and we know that you're going to continue to do great things.
Thank you, Herman.
On Point is a production of the WPAOG Broadcast Network. Please take a moment to rate and review the show, and join us each week for a new episode. Thank you for listening.